Hello, my name is Miguel Marx, and I'm a PhD candidate in the geology department at Lund University in Sweden. And I, along with my co-authors, are very excited to share our recent article in Peer describing an exquisitely preserved plesiosaur skeleton from the world-famous Lower Jurassic Posidonia shale in southwestern Germany. And plesiosaurs, as you might be aware, maybe you've heard of plesiosaur before, are these famous, iconic marine reptiles from the time of the dinosaurs that are characterized with a long snake-like neck and a round body with two pairs of flippers. And they were swimming around the seas during the Mesozoic while the dinosaurs were up on land. And they went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous, but they had several significant radiation events where they were rapidly diversifying into different species. And one of these radiation events occurred during the early Jurassic, which is the age of this new plesiosaur that we studied in this article. And this plesiosaur turned out to be another individual of the species Plesiopterys wildi, which was originally named and described by O'Keefe in 2004, based on the holotype, a juvenile Plesiopterys wildi at the Natural History Museum in Stuttgart. And that's a younger individual. This new one in the article we have here with Peer is an older individual, and we were able to distinguish a couple characteristics in the skeleton that allowed us to make a confident assessment of its ontogenetic stage, it's how old it was. The neural arches are fused to the centra in this older individual, while the cervical ribs, the neck ribs are not fused. So there were a mix of features that allow us to say that this was older than the holotype, something like a subadult, but a second individual of Plesiopterys wildi, at 3 meters in length from the tip of the snout to the end of the tail, and the exquisite preservation allowed us to learn much more about the anatomy of the species and compare it to other early Jurassic plesiosaurs to understand its relationship, its evolution relationship to other plesiosaurs during this important radiation event. And so this plesiosaur is important for a number of reasons. It allows us exquisite and unprecedented insight into rarely preserved parts of plesiosaur anatomy, like the brain case, for example, that would have housed the brain when the animal was alive. The inner ear, the semicircular canals are also preserved. So there are important aspects to the skeleton that are not so commonly found in other plesiosaurs because they're just generally incomplete. But this one being very well complete allowed for this kind of detailed assessment. And in addition, this being Plesiopterys wildi, we were able to look at its anatomy and determine using phylogenetic analyses that this was actually a relatively derived plesiosaur, more derived than the other primitive uh, coeval contemporaneous plesiosaurs from the early Jurassic. So it was more close related to derived forms that characterize late Jurassic uh, oceans. So it was more close related to these um, cryptoclidians than it was to other plesiosaurs from the early Jurassic. So it was kind of like this intermediate taxon between these more basal species and these more derived species that came to dominate the Mesozoic seas. Another interesting aspect from the study is the hypothesis of regional endemism in various plesiosaur assemblages from early Jurassic Europe. So to set the context, much of Europe during the Jurassic was covered by a shallow sea, with only a couple islands poking out above sea level. So much of Europe was really, by virtue of its geography, separated into different uh, sections. And when I was studying this plesiosaur initially, I thought we were dealing with a new species, but then it turned out to be Plesiopterys. And Plesiopterys wildi is known only from the southwestern German basin. So we have this new specimen in our paper, turns out to be a plesiosaur known only from southwestern Germany, nowhere else. And this falls in line with this hypothesis of endemism, previously uh, hypothesized by other researchers. If you look at the plesiosaurs in the Germanic basin, they are completely distinct from nearby English taxa, the English Yorkshire basin. Plesiosaurs that are also early Jurassic in age. So it's interesting. You have different portions of Europe that are relatively close by, but show different species of plesiosaurs living in these various basins. So this in this paper we suggest that endemism may very well actually be an explanation as to this type of segregation that we see in various plesiosaur species. And then to kind of summarize another important aspect of our paper, the Plesiopterys wildi is confirmed to be a legitimate taxon, a real plesiosaur species. Previously, it was hypothesized that Plesiopterys being represented as a juvenile from the holotype. The holotype was juvenile. There was the idea that Plesiopterys is actually synonymous with some other plesiosaur species, like Coeliosaurus. There was the idea that Plesiopterys was actually just a juvenile Coeliosaurus. But we demonstrate in this paper that Plesiopterys wildi is a distinct plesiosaur species. It is not a juvenile Coeliosaurus. It is not an individual of Microclitus or any other plesiosaur. It is its own distinct taxon. So this paper offers some important insights into the diversity, taxonomic diversity, and evolutionary history of plesiosaurs, and it fills in one more piece of the puzzle into their evolution and their grand success story.